In 2023, 1 million babies were aborted in the United States under the protection and defense that it is a woman's reproductive right. It has become a political issue, but it is something far more than that.
Let's see what the Bible says about that.
Even with the overturn of Roe v. Wade here in the United States, abortions have continued, and I was shocked when I looked and found that in 2023, over 1 million babies were still being aborted in just that 1 year. And even more shocking, I'd heard this recently. I was at a banquet for First Look, one of the ministries we support, and they said that there's medical abortions that are still happening at an alarming rate. Like, you can order online the pills to take to cause an abortion for yourself. And the stats are that over 60% of those 1 million were murdered in that way through medicine that was bought or procured in some form and taken by the mother. That's just
over 60% of those.
Yeah, over 60% of those were by medical abortion. That's just staggering that that's still happening. I think, for probably most Christians at least, they were thinking, okay, overturn Roe v. Wade. Yeah. It's all no more abortions.
Yeah.
That's not been the case at all.
Not been the case here in America.
So,
that's heartbreaking.
And it's all been under this umbrella of what there are some groups, I think, the more left side, the more left-leaning liberal agenda would call this a women's reproductive right.
Yeah. And that's the sad thing is that it's labeled as that. It's kind of it is a very misleading label.
Exactly.
As it is very, very removed from the reality of murder of a baby. You say women's reproductive rights, and you're going, man, that sounds actually pretty polished and nice. That sounds like a good idea. We should let women have the right to their own health care and all this kind of stuff. Of course, but
I was thinking, I think what's happened is an inverse. We're going to talk more about this a little bit later, but this just kind of hit me that what's happened is now all of a sudden what's considered sacred is her ability to, how do I want to say this? What's considered sacred is she can have sex whenever she wants, with whoever she wants, whenever she wants.
With no consequences.
No consequences. That's considered sacred. And then all of a sudden the life that's produced is no longer, that's the evil.
Yeah.
That's the parasitic, as we'll talk about. And so that she should have the freedom to do away with.
Rather than the inverse of it, the secular is the going and sleeping with whoever you want, whenever you want, however, and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And the sacred being the baby.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Whereas, sexual immorality would be the immoral and the sacred would be the birth. It's flipped.
Yeah.
Now it's crazy what has happened.
And this view of women's reproductive rights has elevated a woman's personal life and her desires, her future, her whatever aspirations, and her
quote freedoms right
over the creation of an actual human life in the womb.
Yeah. Yep.
This view calls the baby in the womb like an invasion parasite.
Yeah.
It's always just trying to feed off of you, and you're going to have to do so much to care for it and all this stuff. Yeah, it's a human life.
Exactly.
Yes, it requires your life to change. Yes, but this view, it negates the view that life begins at conception, or at least the value of life begins at conception. And that's a whole hotly debated topic there. When does life begin for the people who are trying to determine if abortion's okay or not? But it starts at conception.
Yeah. I saw this video the other day, and it was obviously a close up of sperm hitting the egg, and it was I guess just, I don't know how they procured the film for this, but it showed basically the moment that happened, that there was basically a spark of life. It was a physical, you saw the flash.
Yeah.
Like here's the moment that a spirit enters this life form here.
Incredible.
This life.
Incredible.
Us, this is God's design. And so here is a complete mockery of this design. It negates that is actually happening there, that life and a spirit an identity, a child, a person comes into existence right there in that moment. Yeah.
And again, the view removes God as creator and giver and sustainer of life. It removes that entirely.
Yep.
Because if that's the case, then it would be you taking that life.
Right.
And you don't want that to be the truth. And so you exchange that.
Yep.
The view holds the government is responsible for funding the abortion if she chooses to do that. You know, this view does that. The view ignores the standing of women and men before a holy God to answer for the actions in their life. The view ignores long-term effects of guilt, shame, and pain and regret of a woman who has gone through an abortion. It's a tragic thing that this view overlooks these things. This view it takes the circumstances of rape and incest, which literally only accounts for 2% of all pregnancies, and makes it a rule instead of an exception, and says this is why abortion must be a federal law, or federal allowed funded thing here. This view has become deeply political, but at its root, it's more than just a political issue. It is a deeply spiritual issue.
Yeah. You can't read the Bible very far without finding that God is the one who creates life.
Yeah.
Without understanding that he is the one who says in the Psalms, and you find this with the prophets as well, where God says, I knew you in the womb before you were born. So that means that there had to have been identity in the womb. There had to have been life in the womb. There had to have been a purpose for the life in the womb. So it was, the person was alive in the womb. They had meaning and worth and identity. And God creates them there. And we even find in the scriptures that God, he knits us together in our mother's womb. So he is in the formative stages. He is at work in that. So to take a life from the womb is to take what God has created, what God is forming, what God has given as not just a life form, but a person with a purpose, with significance, with an identity, with meaning, with eternity inbound for them. This is who they are.
Yeah. I mean, you literally see that even in the recorded history in the Gospels of John the Baptist and Jesus in their mother's wombs.
Yeah.
John the Baptist reacting to pregnant Mary walking into the room, jumping in the belly of his mother as human beings, not as parasites, not as clumps of cells, but as spirits, souls, bodies, that they knew even there, like, Jesus is in the room.
Yeah. And the only way you can get to the mindset and heart that allows for that to be able to happen is to be able to dismiss that God is a creator.
Yes.
That God creates life in the womb. So this is not just a political issue. This is a deeply spiritual one.
Yes.
It's one in which a person is rejecting the reality of a creator and when he creates life.
Yeah, exactly. And with all that, we can know that women's reproductive rights, as it is so fancily called, but that abortion is a spiritual issue. Again, like you just said, it is the rejection of God. It is a rejection of his hand, of his authority, of his purposes, of like his tender care for a mother who is pregnant. And it's the elevation of self opposing God, not just like yes, over God, but opposing God, like standing defiantly against it, and it's clearly a spiritual matter. And I saw something the other day that is very relevant to this, and was talking about how abortion is essentially the inverse of communion. It is, or the Eucharist, as it's called in the Catholic tradition. It's the inverse, where Jesus, whenever he's instituting the Lord's Supper, communion, where he is talking about the sacrifice that he has displayed, where he says, this is my body broken for you. This is my blood shed for you, that you would be saved, that your life would be changed. Now, what you have in America, and has been in America for 50 years now, with abortions, is you have people saying, this is my body, and you are going to break for me. right?
Ooh.
This is your body broken for me, as a mother would say,
right,
as she's having an abortion. This is your blood shed for me. I mean, that is as absolutely as much of a spiritual matter as it gets, And I'm not convinced that every person who goes to get an abortion is like demonically influenced or something like that, but because some of them
there's deception for sure.
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. I think it's more deception than it is people going and like trying to, be like, oh, demons. Yeah, this is like I'm
they're not intentionally saying I hate God and I worship the devil. That's not happening.
No,
but they've believed a lie.
Yes,
that seems right to them.
That has resulted in the inverse communion.
You're right. Wow, that's
where
a powerful picture.
With communion, Jesus sacrificing himself for us to have new life. And in this, we are sacrificing new life for us to have life.
Yeah. And I know people say, well, you just can't find that anywhere in the Bible. And you don't find abortion is listed. And, I get it. But if you're careful in your research and you're careful in your reading and understanding of who God is, how he gives life, and the scriptures about when life begins, it's all clearly there. You have to reject God and his ways to deny that. You have to elevate yourself and your circumstances pretty high to deny that. But one of the places that you do find a very much similar situation is in the Old Testament, when there was a time when the god of Molech was being worshipped. This is a demonic idol. And often, as you find in the Old Testament and other religions, when they are attempting to appease the gods, there's this belief that the gods are angry. And if I can appease them by my sacrifices to them, then they will make things go better for me. So this god of Molech, they believed that he needed the sacrifice of people in your family. He needed the sacrifice of children to prove your sincerity, to prove you were genuinely wanting things to go well and appease him. And so they would often offer up their children in a fiery sacrifice to appease the god of Molech. And this is a way of someone saying, I want my future to go better, so I will offer my child as a sacrifice to this God so that my future will be better. That's what was happening. So God institutes a law. And you find this in the Old Testament. You find it in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 2. God says, you shall say to the children of Israel, whoever of the children of Israel or of the strangers who dwell in Israel, who gives any of his descendants or children to Molech, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. This was a strong command. This was not something that God's people were to ever be a part of, because God is the giver of life, and God is a good God who has provided a sacrifice himself. He doesn't want us atoning for our own sins. He sure doesn't want us giving up our children and family members for a better future, giving up and taking life that he has given. God values life. God values children. He doesn't want families sacrificing their children for their own selfish purposes. And so God defines this law. Now, this is clear that the whole discussion of abortion, women's reproductive rights, it's not just a political issue. No. It's a spiritual issue, deeply spiritual. And your view of God has to come into bear with your view of women's reproductive rights or abortion. Now, I do want to say to those who have had an abortion, who are carrying today the guilt, or the shame of that, the regret of that there is forgiveness in Jesus Christ. There is healing and there is redemption. There is hope again. There is not the forever condemnation or stoning, that you must stone yourself, beat yourself, or wear the shame of that. Jesus Christ took upon himself our sin. He bore our sin. He was bruised for our iniquities. He was bruised for the shame of that kind of sin even. And there are women here at Vertical, actually multiple women, many women, who have had an abortion, and they have felt the sting of guilt and shame and regret. And they have come to Jesus Christ, and they have found healing. They have found hope again. They found redemption, and they've gone on to have lives of peace, even in the face of their sin. And so I would say that kind of forgiveness is available to you. If that is something that's been a part of your past, it's clear that this matter is, like we've discussed, an inverse communion, an attempt to atone for yourself. And it is deeply more than just a political matter. It is a spiritual matter.